Welcome to Attican Plays Railway Empire. All right, welcome. This is Attican, and welcome to part 2 of our second playthrough of the Viva Mexico scenario that came out with the recently released DLC. And in part 1, we grew Mexico City to a population of 55,000 very quickly, and we used a totally different technique than we've used before to do a rapid expansion out to add a total of 6 cities into our network. And we got a new task now to transport coffee to Veracruz at the request of the Mexican presidential candidate. And so we're now setting up a line, and we're going to use that same technique we've been using. That technique is that we are running our city-to-city lines through an intervening rural station, which picks up raw material, so that we have both city-to-city goods, passengers, mail, and any goods produced in the city needed in the other city, and the raw materials all coming in on the same line. So, for example, here's T-town. I call it T-town because I just can't pronounce the name. So T-town is going a train coming out of T-town would grab any goods that it produces that are needed in Veracruz, which is the target of this line, and any passengers and mail headed that way, and take off. And then if it has room, it would grab either logs or coffee, which this particular station could pick up 2 things, logs and coffee. And it would fill itself up with those things and move on to Veracruz. Turn around, do the same thing at Veracruz, and go back. So basically we're treating our rural stations like they are pass-through warehouses, only they just hold 1 or 2 goods. In this case, logs and coffee. So we're setting up this line because we've got that requirement to send coffee to Veracruz. And so we're going to set up that line and move ahead. And I'm going to try not to go over and over and over this whole technique that we're using, but we're going to keep using this thing and keep pushing it and see how it does throughout this scenario. So, it's a new technique for me. I explained it in great detail in the last video how I kind of where it came from and what I was thinking and what have you, and we'll continue to push the envelope with it and see how it works as we go forward. And I'll try not to bore you to death by talking about it over and over again. So let's just get back to the gameplay. So now we've got this task to send the coffee to Veracruz, and we're doing that and through this pass-through station down there south of T-town. So in part 1, we put in that textile industry in Mexico City. So to take advantage of that, now we're going to put a tailor in Veracruz, and we're going to bump it up to a level 2 so it can serve both Mexico City and Veracruz, and hopefully T-town will grow in other places. And that means we also want to bump up our textiles because now they have a better customer. Now those textiles are used, the cloth is used for relatively small cities, but just slightly bigger, and they need clothing. So now we've got a nice relationship here where we've got cotton coming in that we're bringing in and making shipping money or train money, transport money, whatever you call it, moving that cotton into Mexico City. We're using that cotton in our own textile plant, which is making money, and then shipping that cloth all over the place. And particularly now we'll have even more demand for the cloth because we've got a tailor there in a connected city in Veracruz, which, by the way, we also own, and we'll make money on that clothing and ship that clothing back to Mexico City and on and on. So lovely thing there to own those industries, and particularly to own those ones that are kind of symbiotic, like the clothing and the tailor. So I kind of interrupted what I was doing there and building up this line because I saw that opportunity that Veracruz had grown sufficiently large to warrant another industry, and I wanted to own that industry rather than have the computer put it in. For a couple of reasons. One, obviously to make the money on it, and two, you want to get the right industry, which just helps all the growth. And the right industry in that case was definitely the tailor. A computer owner might have put a tailor in there, but very well could have put who knows what, something that would never be supplied and would actually stunt growth in your cities, in your network. And I've talked about this a bit, but you really need, with this approach, you need to use a lot of trains running city to city. So here we're going to do this in a long line. We're going to run 8 trains between these 2 cities. And the main reason is, well, one, you can get the traffic and you can make money on them. More trains, generally speaking, in this game means more money. And two, it's a dedicated line, so 8 trains is not going to clog it up by any stretch. It's going to they're going to get good flow in and out of those stations. They're dedicated platforms on each end. And 3, because as these cities grow and you get more and more passengers and mail, you need a lot of trains in order to have some. You got to have some trains running without a lot of passengers and mail. Otherwise, you don't get any raw materials moving. That's kind of where this method, I guess you could say, breaks down. But one of the things about this method is if your cities are large enough and you have 2 large cities going back and forth, you could actually have the entire line just be passengers and mail and a few goods from the city to city, and your raw materials would never get picked up, and then that would kind of stunt your growth. And there are ways to deal with that, and the obvious one would be, set up some freight-only trains and add them into the line, or you could even, if they're really big cities, you could set the entire line to freight-only and then run a second line, which would be passengers and mail, and that would be really good because then you could really make some money because your passenger mail line would then, if you use the right trains, which you of course would do, you would get the express trains, and then you could end up with express lines, and those express lines you could charge higher ticket prices, make a lot of money shipping passengers and mail back and forth. So then you would have a very profitable running full kind of freight line between the 2 large cities and very profitable passenger line running between the 2 cities. That's assuming you've got enough room, you've got enough platforms to do that. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. So now we're going beyond to set up another connection now from Oaxaca to T-town, and this is going to give Oaxaca actually a beer meat in both directions because it produces meat. It's already connected to Veracruz from part 1, and it's a beer producer, and now T-town is a beer producer as well. And as I recall, I don't really go to build out T-town. Too much happens, and I don't have time. So it's not a great beer producer over in T-town because of the lack of wheat. But nevertheless, this will be a good line because now we've got passengers and mail between T-town and Oaxaca, and we'll have sugar that goes back and forth to the 2 cities. So we're going to have sugar and passengers and mail at a minimum. Now we've got, I can't, this line won't work. Now, why won't this work? I saw why as I was just talking a minute ago, but made a little mistake down here at the end, and now I'm looking to see what's going on. Have I missed a connection? So I'm carefully going through the line to make sure everything connected up. I didn't have any gaps. And then finally I see what's wrong. I'd actually gone in and instead of making a point-to-point connection into one platform in T-town, I actually connected it to both lines. So I'm going to correct that by running a little half of an X crossing. I'm going to run a line like that and then delete the little piece I don't want into that platform that's already been used for my Veracruz line. And now I've got a nice point-to-point there, and I have to clean up that signal because it's too far down now. But once we clean up the signal and get that straight, now we've got a nice line going, and we should be able to go ahead and set up our line now between Oaxaca and T-town. And the reason it wouldn't work before, you've seen it, we've talked about this in other videos, but because the line in T-town was going into both platforms and it didn't have a diamond crossing or some way to get back over, you wouldn't be able to come back. You could go from Oaxaca to T-town, but there would be no way for you to go back to Oaxaca because you couldn't get over to that right hand, since everything's, the signals are forcing everything to drive on the right, you couldn't get back over there, but now we've got that fixed. So we'll run a bunch of trains between Oaxaca and T-town. They'll all make good money, carrying basically some meat and sugar and passengers and mail. And here I am again. I'm not in a rhythm. I've said this before. This is a new technique for me. I don't have my rhythm yet as far as building the lines and making sure I put supply towers. So a recurring theme, I mentioned this in part one, will be occasionally we'll see those triangles popping up where they don't have the right resources. It's because supplies, and that's because I just keep forgetting to do the supply towers. But I eventually fix them all and everything works. Now, I mentioned in part one, I'm going to take a different approach on maintenance. So first thing about maintenance is I'm actually going to do it. I've been playing a lot of run-throughs lately where didn't do maintenance at all. And unfortunately, I think this is a bad thing, but you can play this game very successfully and very well and never build a maintenance building. One thing you can do, of course, is just replace your entire fleet from time to time with new locomotives. So that kind of gives everybody total maintenance, if you will. Secondly, the penalty you pay for the breakdowns isn't horribly severe. It certainly clogs things up a bit, but it's not that severe. So you can live with them. And if you don't mind seeing a bunch of triangles all around your screen warning you that you've got breakdowns, you can play without maintenance. But I really think it's cleaner.
He is less interested in his beloved home country than his own power.
Let's let Leland talk. So he's triggered. We must have finally sent our first coffee to Veracruz.
Who does that gringo think he is? We don't have time for this kind of chit-chat. This is about the well-being of Mexico. Back to work.
Excuse me, but I haven't formally introduced myself. Leland Stanford at your service. And unlike our general, I don't hide my intentions.
Okay, now
we tap the resources of Mexico and export them to the United States. We're going to make a mint, and the people of Mexico will benefit as foreign capital flows into the country. Let's start this way. Do not deliver this coffee to Veracruz, but instead deliver it to my trading partner on the West Coast. I can even take over a bigger quantity, so more profit for you. The miracle of capitalism, my friend.
Okay, so this is the first time we've had a choice in a scenario. I mentioned this in the first one.
If we don't watch out, they will infest us like a swarm of locusts. Stick to my plan. Viva Mexico.
And the first time we went with the presidential candidate, and we did his task, and we had to grow a bunch of cities down south, and we had to move some arms down there to stop the bandits and all that good stuff. It was very good. But this time we're going to make the other choice. We're going to go with the American capitalist Stanford. So we're going to make sure that we do what he suggested, which is get the coffee over to Acapulco. So that's what we're doing here, is setting up a line, and we also bought the coffee plantation there south of T-town. And we're going to run that over to Acapulco and make sure that we can then satisfy that coffee need in Acapulco rather than before. Rather, the all the coffee gets up to Veracruz, which we originally started to do. And what I tried to do when I played this is kind of pretend I didn't know what was coming at this point. Of course, once you played it once, you know that this is going to happen. You know those two are going to be in conflict. And the first time through, I just let it run and did the presidential candidate, the Mexican presidential candidate path. And we did that. Now this time we want to do the other one, which is the American capitalist. So we're going to need to get some more money. So we're going to use our technique of closing a bond so that we can open a larger bond. All right, so now we've got some money and we can get this line going. And this one's going to be different. We have a special requirement here. This is not going to be your city-to-city pass-through. This is going to be a dedicated line running coffee to Acapulco. And one reason is that Acapulco, not only is this a specific objective for us, but also because Acapulco is an export site, so it has a high demand for the coffee. And we're going to make sure that we can max out and send as much as we can to Acapulco to make profit on it. And also now that's why we bought that coffee plantation, because now if we have a high demand for coffee, why not own the plantation, get paid for have the plantation make money, have the shipping make money, and get a win-win going there. So this time I did remember supply towers, getting a little better. Although it would have been better if I'd set that one first instead of the one just to the left of it, but never mind. At any rate, at least I did set them. So we're going to run full trains, and we need 60, so I'm going to run 8 trains. That would be a total capacity of 64. So that way I know that when that 8th train loads up, that we'll soon hit our objective. And it also means that I don't have to worry about any delay whatsoever about a train getting back there in time to pick up the load. And what we're going to do now is enlarge or expand the coffee plantation so it's producing faster and faster. Remember, we've got that export capability in Acapulco, and that's going to give us unusually high demand. Now, what I'm doing here is kind of a lazy way to cut that off. What I want to do is make sure that I don't end up satisfying the presidential candidate before I get all that coffee shipped. So I'm actually going to break my line between T-town and Veracruz momentarily. And this is the lazy way to do this. I could have gone in, edited that line, and told all those trains not to pick up coffee. That would have worked as well, and that would have been better. But then I would have had to go right back and edit them again to tell them not to do it. So I went lazy. I deleted a little section of track there so that my T-town line is basically going to freeze on me, and those trains are just going to sit there because they can't complete their route anymore. That's going to cut off the flow of coffee into Veracruz to make sure that we have time to finish the Stanford run. So those of you who are good players, obviously the way you do that is edit the line. Those of you who are lazy players like me, just delete a little piece of track and does the same thing. Hurts our economy a little bit. Now there, I'm checking the demand for the coffee because it's not an infinite demand situation. We talked about infinite demand before in some of the scenarios. Really, in fact, I'm going to go back and revisit that. But if you check your city demand, it's demanding 7 a week. So I would like to get this coffee up past 7 a week because it's going to eventually, I'm going to turn that other line back on, and I'm going to be able to ship at least 7 a week to Acapulco and also ship coffee to T-town and to Veracruz. So I want to have my coffee plantation up here where it's creating at least 7 a week. Right now it's at a little over 6. So I want to do one more expansion with it. So I'm going to pay off a bond. And unfortunately, the math doesn't work out that I can open another one, but I can wait a little bit and close out another bond and then open up a larger bond, or just use the cash that I have. And see those warnings, that's where I've shut off that line. So I decided to just use the cash or pay it off. Okay, good for me. I paid off the bond first and then opened up a bigger bond, so now I have even more cash, got plenty of money. I can expand this one more time, and now it's producing 11 coffee a week. I can ship 7 off to Acapulco, and the other 4 can serve the other 2 cities. So now we're looking good for getting that done and getting our coffee over to Acapulco. And it shouldn't take long, because once we get that 8th train loaded, we know we've got sufficient coffee to get the task done. And we're almost there. We've got one more train to come in, and we will finish off our objective, and then we'll get a new set of objectives, because now we will have picked a different task. And now that I see I'm almost done, I can go ahead and turn that line back on. There's no way that Veracruz is going to suddenly get a whole bunch of coffee faster than my trains can get over there. There we go. So now we have a whole new set of orders for building up Acapulco. We have to send wood and grain and,
However, those are the laws of the market.
let's see, what is it? Grain, wood, beer, and cloth to Acapulco.
So listen, my business partner.
I'm sorry about that, Leland. A little editing thing there. I accidentally cut off his speech a little bit, but at any rate, they want us to grow Acapulco, and we know the task. The wood, grain, cloth, and wheat, I think I said. Okay, so we're going to figure out how we can do that. Now, we've got cloth up there in our plant up in Mexico City, so there's an obvious thing. So what we really need is a line, and this would be a nice thing to have anyway, a line that goes between Mexico City and Acapulco. So now we're going to use our handy dandy version 1.4 update tool to do this connection. And I am going to go back and do an addendum to my version 1.4 update now that I've played with these some more and understand them a little better. I'm going to walk through the details of how you use these things a little bit better. This one here, you'll see me goof it up a couple of times. It's kind of tricky if you're mouse challenged like I am. But there, I got it right. It's basically a matter of right-clicking right after you get the connections. But anyway, a very easy way to make that pretty little loop there. So what we want to do is set up a line that goes between Acapulco and Mexico City, and that will bring cloth down to Mexico City in addition to passengers and mail and logs and sugar. So now I ran the one from Mexico down to Acapulco. Now I'm setting up the one going in the opposite direction. And if you click in that one little spot there, that's the one spot where it's uniquely that line, the 2 lines I just set up. So we can click there and find our 2. Whoops. Now I forgot what I was doing. I opened up the line instead. Wanted to make sure the line was actually passing through there. There we go. Now we've got our 2, and now we can duplicate. And we're starting to have a lot of trains running in that line going up to Mexico City, and it's not the line. The middle of the line doesn't matter, but what's happening at the platform, we have to make sure we don't get too much traffic there. But actually, our use of that platform is not that great right now. It's not that high, and we can see we've got our first one coming down. So that's going to help us with our cloth. We'll do a little bit more to make sure that happens quickly. Tell you the truth, right there, I'm not sure what I was thinking. Okay, so we've got, we know the grain is going to go to Acapulco because we have that line running from Guadalajara through a wheat farm into Acapulco. So grain will come from that wheat farm. So we've got that one started. And our wood will come from our line that we just set up from Mexico City to Acapulco. So that's the wood and the cloth. So wood and cloth are coming from the Mexico City line, and beer and wheat or grain are coming from the Guadalajara to Acapulco line. So we've got all four of them started, and as I said, we're going to do just a little more to speed them up just a hair. But basically, we could let that run, and eventually it would satisfy that need completely. So while that's going, we think we're in pretty good shape here. So while that's going, we've got money. Don't sit on your money. Spend it. Invest it in something else. So we're going to set up another line here. We're going to set up a line up to Tampico from Mexico City. So we put our station in Mexico City, and then this one's another one of those where we're going to give a little ground because we want to pick up something on the way and keep using our technique. So we're going to go up there. There's coffee and sugar up there to the north of Tampico, and we're going to set up a station and run through that, set up that station so it can pick up both the coffee and the sugar and be able to move that to Mexico City and to Tampico. Now, of course, Mexico City already has a source for coffee and sugar from the south, but this will give us some redundancy, so it'll make sure it gets plenty of coffee, plenty of sugar, and of course, the big thing too, it'll bring the coffee and sugar down into Tampico, and we'll get paid for that. So this is yet another profitable line. And of course, even if we didn't do that, we would still have the passengers and mail between the two cities, which would be profitable. This way, it'll just be a little more profitable. Now, there is a trade-off here, of course, because we are running a slightly longer line. It's going to have freight on it. It's not going to go quite as fast. Our ticket prices won't be quite as high because the service is not as fast as it could have been had we just run. Well, particularly if you compare it to a direct line with passengers and mail only, that would be much more profitable as a line, but you wouldn't get as much passengers if you didn't build it up, and your train wouldn't be necessarily full all the time. So again, our idea here is to try to have full trains as much as possible by having these pass-through rural stations. Now, another reason we built that line and the driving force really to go off and do that was we had a connection bonus with Tampico. So a big chunk of the money we spent on this line was a freebie, so to speak, because of that bonus for the connection. So by following these connections, you can get profitable lines built for a very, very cheap price. So that means they pay for themselves very quickly, and then you're making pure profit from then on. So even if this is not a perfect line, even if we've already got sugar and coffee going into Mexico. And even if, Tampico, so right now doesn't have a direct line to its meat to cattle, doesn't matter. This was almost a freebie, as we got $366,000 bonus for doing it, and it will absolutely make good profit. And there I realized something didn't quite feel right when I set that up. When I set up the Mexico to Tampico, the first one, I failed to hit the warehouse on the return. And I knew it, I could feel it, and went back and checked it, and sure enough. So fortunately, I fixed that before starting the copies. That way, all the copies are correct, and I don't have to go back and edit every one of them. So there we go. We got yet another city into our network. So what are we up to now? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We're up to 9 cities now connected into our network, and with a whole bunch of lines running, and a number of raw materials connected in, and city growth happening reasonably well all over the place. So far, this is going pretty well.
It's a pleasure making a deal with you.
So at this point, I check our progress going to Acapulco and decide that cloth is moving too slowly, and I don't want to be at the mercy of the line. So I'm going to set up a train here, and this is going to be kind of a temporary train, but it's going to run full with cloth from Mexico City directly to Acapulco. Now, it is going to tie up that platform for a moment here while it loads, but it's fairly fast. But we're just waiting for that last one to get in there, and then it will take off and go to Acapulco. And I'm going to give it a name so that I can find it easily later, because as I said, this is a temp train. This is just to help us get that objective met. We're going to make sure we have a full load of cloth going directly to Acapulco, and once we close out that cloth requirement, we will delete that train. So now through our research, we've come up with a bit of a faster locomotive that can handle all of our freight needs. So we just did a mass update of all of our trains over to this Inyo, which is a little faster than the Fairley. It actually has, I think, a slightly less tractive power, but it has plenty of power. We're not running a whole lot of heavy hills here, so tractive power should be okay, and the speed will be nice. And here we're going to deal with that wood. The wood is also not quite coming as fast as we would like.
Come to power, and I fear he will not give up on the presidency that easy. Let us hope he has more important things to do than seeking out revenge on you.
Okay, so what was I? Oh yes, we set up a little temp train here from our wood station over to Acapulco as well, and it's just one train going to run full with wood with logs, and we're setting up that little diamond there in case I forget it. If it needs to run back and do it again, if I didn't have the diamond there to cross over, it wouldn't be. It'd have to go all the way to Mexico City and turn around and come back. So I put the little diamond in there in case it does come back. And now you can see we're getting better. Our cloth is done, so we're going to go out and find that cloth train. And this is unfortunate. If I'd had the patience, I would have let it go ahead and make its delivery. You can see it's almost full, and I decided to go delete it, and so I actually lose a whole bunch of cloth there. But at any rate, I didn't want it clogging up the line. I could have just left it running, but every time it stops in Mexico City, it really does kind of clog things up. And here's yet again where I've forgotten to put in my supply towers. I've just got to get that as part of my routine. I'm still, as I've said, this technique is new, and I don't quite have that routine yet of building the lines up. So now we're looking pretty good. We've got that one wood train running. We've got grain coming to Acapulco from
Excellent.
Guadalajara.
US customers will be delighted.
There, now our wood is finished. So we're going to find that wood train. And it's handy because we've named it. And this one we caught at the right time. It's nice and empty, so we'll delete it, get a nice refund, and we've got 3 out of 4. We've just got our grain, and it should be in good shape. But we've only got 6 trains running between the two, so I thought maybe to help it out a little bit, I would start a couple more on the Guadalajara end and let them run grain down. And I'm looking here really to see if I have any other options, and I really don't. Running a line from Veracruz to Acapulco ain't gonna make it. But I did notice while I was over there, there's a chemical factory, worthless. So we've got some money. I'm going to buy the chemical factory and put something in that makes sense. So we'll put furniture in here, and by demolishing this chemical factory and putting furniture business in, we can take advantage of the fact that we got that nice little short line down there to those logs. So we can get logs in T-town, have a profitable furniture industry, and sell that furniture. T-town's growing, so it'll use furniture, and we can sell that furniture also in Veracruz, possibly Oaxaca if it grows big enough as well, and then we're looking good. So now we're just missing a little bit of grain to get the job done, and we will have our next set of tasks completed. And again, so far, pretty pleased with this alternative technique. The pass-through rural station seems to be working pretty well. Got it here, might as well take advantage of it. So decided to set up a line between Guadalajara and Mexico City, because I know Mexico City will be big enough to consume that fruit. And we'll set up a line here, but on this one, as I recall, I only run a couple of trains because I don't want to have, it's just going to be basically for picking up fruit, but we still want it ready so that if when Guadalajara grows, it can get the fruit as well. But because fruit is not a huge consumption item, it's not an item that it's not one of the big 6, the first ones, and the demand isn't gigantic for it. And also, there you go again. We got a $417,000 bonus for doing this, so this is basically another freebie. This one's truly a freebie. We're actually making money by building this line. And we'll run a couple of trains from Acapulco through that station up to Mexico City and return, of course. And that will give us fruit going into both cities and a couple more profitable trains. And basically, again, more than freebie. We actually we're actually spending less money setting this line up than we got in a bonus. And here we're going to use our merging technique to link up to the outside line, then grab our little cone and go back and set up our right-hand lane, going back to the rural station. And that's all it took, is that little bit of track there, that little bypass track, if you will, to give us another line from Guadalajara to Mexico City. And it's really a redundant, well, no, it didn't. No, it didn't. This is the first line we've actually set up between the two. No, I take that back. We did that log and sugar line is between Guadalajara and Mexico City. And in fact, the fact that that exists, that's why I only ran a couple of trains here, because we already have at least 6 trains running between Guadalajara and Mexico City. This will give us 8 once we set up 2 more. And we're very, very close on our grain. And I decided to bite the bullet. And this is one I wish I'd done earlier. I decided to go ahead and build one just similar to the way we did the cloth. Have a dedicated train that says, "Hey, fill yourself up with wheat or grain, and take it to Acapulco." And again, I'm going to put the little diamond crossing there coming out of the platform just in case the train needs to come back, in case we need to, I don't delete it in time or whatever. So there, now when that fills up, now we're good to go. Now we know at worst case, that train will finish off our requirement for the grain to Acapulco. And if I'm doing this one again, actually those specialty trains, I would have built those earlier and made sure that this one got done even faster, and then deleted them later. So the technique I used I liked, but the timing of it could have been better. I could have been more aggressive with it and gotten them done, as I said, quicker. So now, while that's working, we're going to keep on expanding. We've got an opportunity here. We've got a beer-to-beer line with a wheat field, a wheat farm in between them. That's a great opportunity to run a beer line and go get that wheat and send wheat to San Luis Potosi down here and to Durango up there where we started this line. So now we're going to have a nice profitable line between these 2 cities. You can see San Luis Potosi is actually dwindling right now because it's not getting supplied very well. This will help a bunch when it starts getting wheat in there to that beer plant, that brewery in San Luis Potosi. And it'll also, of course, help Durango, and we'll have another profitable line running between the 2 cities, and we'll have those 2 beer industries doing better and both cities growing. So I think the moral here is when you're doing these scenarios and you're just waiting on an objective, if you have the chance to go build something else while you're waiting, don't wait, go build. Make more investments, expand your economy, expand your little empire, and make more money. So we're still waiting. We've got plenty of money, so let's find someplace else to expand to. And here's a good one because we can go from Tampico up there to, I think that's Nuevo Laredo, and pass through that cattle ranch. And now that won't be so great for Nuevo Laredo. It's a beer city. Oh, it's Monterey, excuse me. Monterey is a beer producer, but it will be good for Tampico because it'll get the cattle coming back to it. And of course, we'll have a nice, profitable beer meat line, which is just what we like to have.
Not bad. That task is done.
Okay, so that indicates that we finished that out. Now we've got a whole new set of tasks where we have to do iron, coal, and oil into Mazatlan, and we will take that up in part 3. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope it'll help you become a better player, and I hope you'll join us for our next Railway Empire video. Thank you.